Alright, we're going to go ahead and put our hook in the vise, and this is a Gamakatsu B10S. It's a classic streamer hook. I designed these more for smallmouth than for trout, so if you're fishing for trout, you might want to go with a little bit smaller hook than the 2 and the 1. But we're starting out with the size 2, and we're going to go ahead and put down our base layer of thread. I just go to about the start of the hook point and stop. Then we go to our next material, which is fish, hunter, marabou. This is, again, one of my favorite tailing materials. This is a burnished golden tan. And we're just looking for one feather. We've got it right there. So I'm going to pull it off of the packaging. And, yep, that is what we're looking for. So it's just basically a little tail. I'm just making sure when I do that everything folds back straight. There's no crazy looking feathers or fibers. And we're making this a little bit longer than how long the hook shank is. And I'm just going to pinch that into place with my right hand, then transfer that to my left, and do some wraps to secure it down. And I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this all the way up to about the eye of the hook, and then wrap back. And that's going to make the body be really level, and also make that material super secure. I mean, it's not going anywhere. So we can cut off our excess, and I'll wrap back up to the eye, hit just the bare hook for a little bit, and that makes sure that the material doesn't want to roll as much. If you are wrapping just the material, it can roll, but you go over that hook and you're good. So same color, which is the burnished golden tan, and this is Select Saddle, Fish Hunter Select Saddle. And I'm going to kind of pick through these fibers to find some that look more webby. So with normal Select Saddle, you're going to have certain materials that are really pointy. There's not a lot of webbing. And then like this one right here, you can tell there's some really good webbing. It almost looks like sculpin. Now this one here, it's really thin, wispy. We don't want that for this fly, at least the way that I make them. I want them to be a little bit more thick because I like how that lays back. It's personal preference, but you're watching my tutorial, so I guess you gotta submit to my will. So I've grabbed 2. One is going to be for the back, and one is going to be for the front. And I typically am looking for one on the back that's going to be a little bit smaller, which is this guy. I'm going to pull off some of that webbed style material. And then this is going to be the front. Same thing, pull off some of that web material. And that is just going to stage it up. So I'm going to set that aside and grab the small one. We're going to go ahead and start wrapping that on. I didn't trim it or anything. I literally just tied it in by the tip. And then I'm going to tie back to the same spot where my marabou was. Then grab my F-staz. This is just normal, medium F-staz. This is a tan material. I think it's, no, wait, no, it's peach, I think it's the name. And it is a rope with little tiny fibers sticking off the side. And this is how, I typically like making these with F-staz. It's a cheap material, it looks good. It kind of gives like a lighter style look to the fly. And we're going to tie it in the same way as we tied in the feather, which is I just lay it on the side of the hook and wrap down to where my marabou and the saddle hackle is, and then wind up to the eye, which is my resting point. And then I'm going to just start wrapping up the F-staz. And you try and make it even as you can and keep it tight. If you watch like Kelly Galloup, he's the guy who made this pattern. If you watch his video on this, you'll see he wraps like 3-4 times and then wraps really tight. That's a good way of securing it. On this one, I'm just going to consistently wrap tight because I'm kind of lazy. I'm going to wrap up to my thread, which is my stopping point. And pull it tight. I'm going to do 2 securing wraps over it with this GSP and pull really tight, and then do some wraps in the front. You can do a ton. And so basically I just made that material fold over itself, and then I tied down on top of it, which I'll show you a little bit easier later on with a different material. But once we've wrapped that up, we're going to do our open wraps, which are wraps that are not touching, with the webby saddle hackle. Again, this is kind of like sculpin, but most packs of sculpin, you're going to get stuff that's, in my taste, a little too webby. which is why I typically reach for the Select Saddle by Nature Spirit. And you will notice we have just made a woolly bugger. That is the back half of this fly. It is a woolly bugger. I'm just kind of getting to where I want to clean it up. So I'm pulling back fibers that I don't want to tie down with my right hand, and I'm holding them away. So I'm just going to wrap just the stem of this thing. So there's nothing else. I'm going to do the same process with the Estaz, and I'm going to keep wrapping. I'm going to make a little bit of a head here because we're going to add one material to the top of this fly, which is what gives it a lot of action. So this is a woolly bugger, but now we're going to take our big pack of mallard flank. This is Wood Duck Gold. It's the only, to my knowledge, this is the only one that they make. And I just pull out a bunch of feathers because we're looking for very specific feathers out of this. We want a feather that is long and is as straight as possible. And you can see some of them are really curled. That actually, we can get away with that on this because when you lay it on the shank of the hook, it'll kind of straighten it out a little bit. But these are the two that I have come up with. A smaller one for the back, and then you can see it's nice and straight. And then we've got our one for the front, which is a little bit wider, a little bit longer. Get rid of that extra. So do the same thing, just pull that wispy fibers at the base because we don't want to tie that in. But that is it. Now, pull the wispy fibers on the other fiber, or the other feather. And you can see that is going to look pretty good. I like that. So the front one is going to lay on top of the back one, kind of like what you see here. And so the back one is going to be moving, and the front one is, the head of the fly, so that one's not going to be moving. So I typically like to find one that, looks like it's got some pretty good thick stem in it, because you want this thing to stay on the top and in the middle as best as possible. Go ahead and wrap that down. Now, you would think I can just bring my scissors in here and cut this material off. And if you just cut it right now, you can do that. I mean, that's fine. But typically what I like to do is fold that material over and then wrap on top of it. And that really secures the feather in and then ensures, to some extent, that it is going to stay on the top of the hook, which is imperative if you want this fly to swim, consistently with other ones, or just well, because if it's going off to one side, it's going to tend to favor that one side or that one action more than, right on top, which is a little bit more consistent, or basically, it'll swing from left to right, from left to right. Whereas if you just do on one side, maybe it's only going left, 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 or right, right, right. But that would make sense probably if I had some action shots or something. But just put a little bit of super glue to secure the thread wraps and the mallard flank as well, because I kind of let it dip on that. Then we whip finish and cut it, and we have finished the back half of the fly. So the next step is going to be putting in our bigger hook, which is the size 1, and I am going to start the thread on that the same way as we started it on the other one, which is basically just laying down foundation wraps, and cut the tag end. And we're going to grab articulated fish spine 20mm. This is where I vary a little bit from how Kelly Galloup does this. He uses the wire and bead method. I like this because I'm lazy and I own a fly shop. So I have plenty of these articulated fish spines laying around. And you're pretty confident that this is never going to come out, which I like. Because I just tie in that eye of the hook. I don't even cut it off or anything, because I'm just going to wrap materials over it. But I'm going to wrap that in with plenty of wraps, and we are going to repeat the fly. Like literally completely every step that you did on the back. If I can get my vise to be happy with me. I'm going to tie in the marabou, which is going just about maybe a quarter of the way down the mallard flank. And the super glue really like to grab that thing. So I'm going to cut that and wrap in a little bit more. If you see, my vise is moving a lot. I have it resting on a book, so that way I can record this video, so it doesn't typically move that much. But next material is Flashabou. This is just red. And I really do like adding this material in there. It gives it that sort of like gill effect. And so I just tie in a clump. This is probably 8 to 10 strands of material. And I'm going to kind of spread those out and cut them. And I cut them same way that Kelly does, which is it just passes the eye of the hook a little bit. Now he does it to where it covers the bead and hits the eye of the hook. We have a smaller gap between there because we didn't add a bead and we didn't do wire. We just made shank connection. So you have to do a little bit of guesstimating. But I just, with my fingers, spread this around the hook and kind of get it even on every side. And then once you feel like you've gotten it even, I wrap back. And I'm happy with that. I've kind of favored the left and the right hand side, not as much on the top because, you know, a fish isn't necessarily going to see what's on the top. He's going to come from the side or maybe below. And we're going to do the same step as the back now, which is adding the saddle hackle that we already pre-selected and prepped. And then I do a different color in the front with this Estaz. This is Estaz medium in a deep red. And I kind of like this because it gives, again, that effect of gills. Maybe it's an injured baitfish or something like that. But with this like tan and ginger sort of look, I don't know if fish think it's a crayfish or if it's a little sucker or what. But I've caught a lot of smallmouth on it. I've caught a lot of trout on it too. But I like adding just that little flare, you know, of red. I'm going to wrap it up the same way. And once I get past the eye of that shank that I have in there, that's it, I'm going to stop. That's one of the reasons I like doing it this way, because I have a consistent pattern. If I sit down and tie a dozen of these, I can make them look pretty much identical because I have stops, like mental stops, that I know. Okay, once I pass the eye of the shank, then I cut off my Estaz. So it's helpful for me. I mean, you can make them however you want, but then I'm going to do the open spiral wraps with my saddle hackle. And I'm not making this too fancy. I don't care which way it goes. I just want it to go around the hook and not trap itself down. Again, we've basically just made a double woolly bugger. I mean, that's what a lot of these flies pretty much are. They articulated streamers. And I'm going to keep wrapping up to where I get to the bare stem. And I'm going to do 2 wraps, maybe 3, and then wrap in front. And again, I'm wrapping back over that stem. Now I'm going to cut that off, clean up the head, and going to grab my next material, which is some super glue, because actually what we're going to do is I'm going to add the eyes now. You might have been wondering the whole time, why haven't you put the eyes on? And the honest answer is I have no idea. I add eyes at different times. I felt like doing the shank. Sometimes I like it to have a little bit more meat for the eye to grab to. And these are double pupil lead eyes. And these are a medium. There are times where I like to throw this on a 6-weight. So if you have the large eyes, that's a little bit more difficult to do. But again, I have the 6-weight, which is like the Exocet SS 200 grain, which is what I throw this on. I throw this pattern a lot. And the medium eyes do great. Now we're going to take our bigger feather, and I'm going to lay that to where it's about halfway down the hook shank, maybe a little over, and I'm going to wrap that in right on top. I'm going to do a couple wraps and just make sure that it's where I want it. So you can adjust with your right hand. And I pull it a little bit just to make it right where I want it. So that top one, or the one on the front, lands about halfway, maybe a little over halfway of the mallard on the back. and then I'm going to fold it backwards, just like I did on the other one, and then trim it. You can start really seeing this fly to take shape now. It's looking good, I think, so far. Everything is orienting correctly, and you can kind of see from the top, what that's going to look like. But next material is sculpin wool, and this is the natural stuff, and this color is ginger, which is one of my favorite colors for making these because I feel like you don't see a lot of flies in this color. But it does work really well. So that's about the size of the clump that we're going to cut. And I typically do 3 little segments on this. So if you've never used this material, there's good sculpin material and there's really bad wool. So this is actually like primo, like it looks really good. And I usually always start off with some of the gel super glue. And once I've added that on, then I'm just going to kind of flatten out that wool and tie it in about right in the middle of this thing. So do 2 wraps and tighten down. And that glue holds that stuff super well. And I'm using, again, the gel spun thread, so you can put a ton of pressure on it. And the more wraps you do, typically the messier the fly looks. So I try to just add glue and use a lot of tension, and that makes the flies typically look better. So I'm going to do gel on the bottom. And with the bottom one, I typically really flatten out. It's the same amount of wool, but I flatten it out a lot more, and I even cover over the eyes on both sides, so that'll fill in some of the gaps. I'm going to do 1 wrap in, and I'm actually going to now bring it up the center of the eyes, and that's how you cover that gap that is in the eyes. So my thread is physically pulling that, and then you don't have that separation that happens sometimes right under the dumbbell eyes. I'm going to hold it back with my left hand and try not to poke myself in the hand. And I've grabbed the 3rd clump, which is the same amount. We're going to add some super glue. And this is basically how we spin deer hair, or how I spin deer hair. I like using glue because it stays in. But I'm going to grab it and just kind of rest it around with my left hand. And then with my right hand, I'm going to get my thread where I want it. Do 2 wraps and just give it a bunch of tension. With my left hand, I'm going to pull all those fibers back. And now I'm on the bare hook shank. It takes a little bit to learn how to, handle these materials to where they're not just messy all the time. And I mean, if you're looking at it right now, you're thinking that thing looks so messy. But just trust the process. We're going to do a whip finish, which again, my left hand is holding all those fibers back. And tighten that down a lot. I go in and trim. And then now comes the fun part, which is take a comb and comb it out. You got a pretty good looking head of hair here. And you can see, I mean, from the comb, I didn't do a ton of wraps around that stuff, but all that stuff is staying in place through even me running it through the comb. I mean, it's enough tension to move the vise, or move the hook. So I just kind of comb out the whole thing, and that makes sure none of those fibers are trapped, which means that our trim job is going to be even better. And we're going to go ahead and I pull straight down. I feel like I'm doing this opposite, but I'm going to cut right across the bottom here. Clean it up. And I do the bottom pretty much flush, or pretty much like just a straight cut with the bottom of those eyes. And that ensures that, my hook gap is visible and everything. And I just take little passes at a time once I've done the bottom to get it straight. And sometimes I speed up, the trim processes, but I might not on this one because I see a lot of people that have problems with the trimming on these things. So I'll just kind of show you my process. So once I've trimmed the bottom, I come up on the top at a slight angle and kind of work towards the back. So I trim it up or square it up with the eye of the hook. So I want the hook exposed. I want the bottom to be nice and neat. And then I'm going to make sure my sides are level. And depending on how much water you want this thing to hold, you can leave the head bigger, if you want it to push a lot. Typically when I'm throwing like a ginger or tan style fly, the water is a little bit more clear, so I like to go with a little bit thinner head. Again, that's so I can throw it on a 6-weight, but also I just don't think I need the amount of push that you get with a large fly. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to make the head size exactly like what I'm doing here. Just kind of do it to whatever style of fishing you like. If you're throwing this on an 8-weight, you can keep the head huge if you want. But I'm going to kind of keep making little passes at it at an angle. And I leave that top layer pretty decently long. And that gives you just a little bit more shoulder to the fly, makes it look more like a fish. And then I'm just going to go in and make some small cuts. You can see it starting to take shape there. From the top down, this is the look that you got. You want that back hook to be able to swim freely. And as long as it does that, it doesn't foul up every time, then you are golden. And you can trim to your desired preference, but this is how I like making mine. And I tell you, that little thing right there will smoke some smallmouth. It is not my pattern. This is Kelly Galloup's pattern. This is just how I like to tie it. So there you go.